So we did a little bit of digging before. I understand you're a bit of a powerboat racer. Or were a powerboat racer?
I was. I gave up in 2018.
Oh, okay.
I'd raced probably from about 26 years old all the way through.
Yeah.
So I had a few breaks here and there, but I won. There was one race I effectively had never won officially, which was the Cows Torquay Cows, which is sort of like the Wimbledon of powerboat racing globally, albeit it's a bit diminished now. And I'd never won that race, and we put together a new boat in 2017, won the race, and ran again in 2018, and was leading up to 100 meters from the finish line, and had a problem. We got pipped, and I thought, you know what, it's time to leave. Time to leave the sport. It was a pretty demoralizing minute in my life to actually have, been to win the race 2 years in a row would have been amazing. And to lose it in that last 100 meters was not great.
What is that then? Just like a local race?
So the Cows Torquay Cows runs from Cows all the way to Torquay and back again. But it is a very challenging race because Lyme Bay is the weather's changed dramatically. So you go down the Solent and it's flat calm. You go into Bournemouth Bay, it could be, the weather could be anything. And then once you go around that corner, St Albans Head, where Swanage is, it gets very rough. And the 2 years that I ran that boat in it, it was extremely, extremely rough.
How do you even sort of get into powerboating? It's a bit of a random sport.
Living in Poole.
Yeah.
As a child, I always loved the water. My father had a boat, and we used to go out and watch the racing. And I always used to say, one day I'm going to do that. And I did it. I started it. I'd like to have all the money that I spent on powerboat racing back now. How about that?
How much do you spend on it?
God knows.
Too much.
A lot of money, millions. I ran a Class 1 boat in 1989, 1991 in the World Offshore Series. The proper team, we were a Lamborghini works team boat. There was 3 boats that were Lamborghini works teamed, and that was extremely expensive, but it was good fun.
So how long do the races usually last?
Most of the races are, it's quite an interesting question actually, that, because these days they've shortened the races quite dramatically, particularly in America. Some of the races are only 40, 50 miles long. But historically, races would be 150 to 250 miles. So in the old days, before we had political correctness, it was proper offshore racing. You went offshore, and it was man and boat against the sea. And, you'd be running 120, 130 in a 6-ton catamaran with twin V12 Lamborghinis. It's a majorly exhilarating sport.
Now, am I right in saying that you've been described as an aggressive driver?
Yeah, I am aggressive. I've been particularly aggressive. I was well known for being aggressive in the rough. I used to love rough races. That was my forte.
What's a rough race?
Big seas. I've never really enjoyed racing in the flat. It used to get a bit boring, to be frank. But it's challenging. The rougher the seas, the more challenging it is.
Yeah, I've never even been involved in anything like that before, so I won't even imagine what it's like.
I can imagine I would definitely prefer it to be like rougher, if that makes sense, when you're racing, because otherwise it's a bit dull, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's an interesting point. Flat races are fast, but that's where problems happen, because you're running hard, you're running on the limit, and that's when accidents happen. Rough races, I suppose, also accidents happen because you can stuff the boat. Well, I've done that, or turn the boat over. But I just enjoy rougher races. I just always have, and I think invariably, coming from this country, the sea invariably is rough, and so I've raced all over the world. So most of the places I've raced, the seas aren't that rough. But when you've been overseas,
where else have you raced?
All over Europe, all over America. I've had good fun doing it.
Great British champion?
I was British champion, I think, a couple of times. I was world champion. Well, it's a bit like boxing, powerboat racing. So you've got different belts, effectively, or different organisations. So yeah, I mean, I've been world champion with one of those belts, and I've been British champion. I think, I don't know, actually, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Last one,
World champion's decent, like very, very decent. Obviously, like I had only heard from Callum that you were into powerboat racing. I had no idea that you're a world champion at it.
Yeah, only one belt effectively. So I wasn't like I wasn't really like what's his name, Tyson Fury, where he's got all the belts.
So the love for
He's
powerboat.
got all the belts bar one, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, at the moment, well, yeah. Well, at the moment, he's just got the WBC, and obviously the ring champion belt. But yeah, I think he'll fight Usyk, and I think he'll probably take them all.
Bit of a boxing fan?
Well, funny enough, I used to be years ago, and I've sort of, I think like all of us, that's been rekindled a little bit. I mean, obviously, it's really interesting what's going on at the moment. And obviously really interesting that the Ben and Eubank fight's been cancelled, which I was really looking forward to see.
Oh, I was genuinely buzzing for it. I've been waiting for it for ages.
I think it would have been a real slug.
Proper tear up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a shame what's happened, but what's happened's happened.
Yeah.
Who was your money on?
Do you know what? That's a really interesting question because I've been following it quite a lot on YouTube and things. I don't know because I think both of them have trained really hard for it. I think you've got to toss a coin.
Yeah.
What do you think about Eubank's mind games with it?
What? I'm only 60% fit. Yeah.
Eating the KFC.
I think that he's much like his father, isn't he? He's a showman, and I mean, like you love him or loathe him. I mean, but I just think it would have been a great fight.
Yeah, I think they're going to postpone it from what I saw on one of the IFL interviews yesterday. But I don't know how long it's going to take until they get that sort of back on track, if that makes sense. It's interesting because, like, I would never have expected it from Conor Benn. I know was it a fertility drug?
Yeah, but that's normally found when you take testosterone. You take the opposite estrogen to actually level that out. So quite clearly, I would think he's been sticking needles in his arse.
Yeah. But I wouldn't expect it from him.
No, but do you know something, right? It's interesting. There was a thing on television about this morning. I think this whole doping issue is massive in sport, in all sport.
1,000%.
Yeah, and it's going on. And you've got, these do-gooders are going, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. But why do you think that records get broken year on year on year on year? And I don't know what the answer is, to be frank. But I think it's a big problem in all sports.
Have you seen Icarus, the documentary on Netflix?
No.
Have you seen it, Cal?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically it's a documentary of a guy that, is it the Tour de France?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the cycling championships, he basically goes to there as a non-professional. And every year he's basically slumping. He's not getting to like the top, I think it's 100 or something along those lines. And he basically decides to start taking testosterone. Goes for a cycle, ends up meeting some crazy Russian doping agent, I would say. And he managed like the Russian team, and they basically like deconstruct the Olympics and show how like the majority of the Russian medal winners were doping for the Olympics. And then that's why basically they got banned for the following Olympics, if that makes sense. So if it's happening at that level, it must be like throughout all sports.
Well, I mean, there was rumours, wasn't there? The Sky Sports cycling team, that all when they stopped, there was a bit of controversy, wasn't there? A year or two after that. So I just think it's a major problem, and probably the easiest solution is you can do what you want.
Yeah. I would prefer to watch that.
And I just think maybe that is the solution. I mean, it's a bit like the drug issue, isn't it? I mean, like you've got all sorts of countries in the world now that are starting to change their attitude to that. Not that I condone that because I think it's pretty bad, certain drugs. But I mean, I don't know what the answer is in sport, but I do think that possibly it's anything goes. It's the only way, because clearly there are drugs that hide people, hide the consequences that people have taken, enhancement drugs. So I think that possibly that's what needs to happen, but whether it will, I God knows.
I can't imagine it happening.
No, I don't think so.
No way. I think Portugal actually decriminalised, I don't know to what degree, but all drugs or like a lot of the base drugs. And then they had like a reflection on the statistics, which showed like basically like drug use and a lot of the things that come associated with that had dropped. So yeah, I can imagine obviously if you were to do that, there would probably be some positives that come out of it.
Yeah, I think I sort of, obviously my past life when I was involved in bars and nightclubs, obviously that was something that was a big issue. And I think that probably the state should control those sort of things, because I think people are taking stuff they don't know what the hell's in it. It's just I read there was an article recently of people packaging gummy bears in Haribo bags. And of course, that's really dangerous because of children, and selling that on the internet. I think that there needs to be state intervention now in the whole, sort of drug scene. And, it seems to have worked in America and Portugal, as you say. But I'm not sure whether the men in grey suits would go along with that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a touchy subject, same as anything when it comes to that, if that makes sense. So I'm interested, obviously, you did mention that, earlier on, you were racing the boats in the initial stages because you're born in Poole. So is that where you grew up initially?
I was actually born in Bournemouth, although I've lived in Poole most of my life, because I consider it the same conurbation, to be frank. Yeah, I mean, I love this area. I was born here. It's a great area. I'm into boating. Love the water. Love getting out on the sea. So yeah, this is the reason I've stayed here, really.
So school-wise, what sort of school did you go to?
So interestingly, I was a dyslexic child. I went to a specialist school called Ravenscroft, which is closed now, in Somerset. It was a boarding school. Sent to boarding school at 7 years old.
Oh, 7 years old.
Pleasant night. Then I went to another school a public school called Brimpton, a small public school, which is a predominantly farming community. And that's closed as well now, funny enough. And left school at 16. And just cracked on.
There's a little bit of like a misconception around dyslexic children, isn't there, at school? Because you think that someone that's dyslexic, they're usually maybe not as intelligent, but they obviously have quite a creative brain, and also quite a lot of entrepreneurs are dyslexic as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I mean, you're right. A lot of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, and a lot of much more famous people than me are dyslexic. I think what dyslexia has given me is a far more agile brain on spatial sort of use. I mean, I can walk in a building and imagine exactly what it can be, whereas a lot of people can't. They will walk for example, a lot of people walk in an apartment which isn't furnished and go, "Oh, I don't like this apartment." You take them up one floor, it's exactly the same apartment that's furnished. They go, "Oh, this is lovely," and you go, "Really?"
Under your breath, space.
It's the same apartment. You haven't even looked out the window. And I think that's it. I mean, years and years ago when I was involved in tenpin bowling, I always remember taking one of my directors to look at a building in London that was an old Odeon cinema, and it was run down, it'd fallen in, and the roof had collapsed. And I wanted to make it into a mega bowl. And he said to me, "Are you sure, Richard?" And I said, "Yeah, I can really see this. 2 floors of bowling. We can really make this something special. We could put a bar out there on the balcony." And it was a beautiful Art Deco building. Anyway, we bought it and did it. And I'll always remember we went on the opening night, he came up to me and he goes, "How did you imagine this?" And I said, "I'm dyslexic." and that is without doubt. And hence the reason why, I've always been quite creative, and I've always enjoyed creating stuff, and that's why I like this business, because I like building buildings and creating buildings, and I think that the one thing that Fortitudo is getting a very big reputation for is creating buildings that's slightly different or really nice. We don't cut corners, I have to be proud of what I do. I'm not one of these people that just wants to get the last penny out of everything. I just want something to be great, make a good return for my shareholders and myself, obviously. But something, when I drive past it, I go, "That's cool."
Yeah, which is probably like there's not many people, I would say, who are like that nowadays.
To be fair, when I walked in here, I actually said to Callum, this place is cool. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head in here. Obviously, when you were at school, what were you like? I'm interested.
I don't know really. Do you know? I didn't get on with. Well, I think that the part I remember is, of course, my last school. I mean, because I am getting on a bit now, so I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but you probably already know that. I didn't really get on that well with many of the guys at school. There was a few that I was good friends with, but a lot of them were, what would I call them, farmers.
Yeah.
I came from a town and they were farmers.
No.
They weren't really inspiring. But what was I like at school? I enjoyed rugby. I was good at that. I wasn't particularly academic. I was good in. It's really interesting. I'll give you one example. So take history, which I really am interested in now. I always remember, I was always about halfway in the tables at school in history. And then when the Industrial Revolution came about, I shot to number one because I found the Industrial Revolution really interesting. And so I've been one of these people that has been a bit of a coaster at school. And probably this is why I push my children hard now, because I think in a way they could be a bit like that. They're bright, but they need to be pushed. And I think now, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately with from the bottom of my heart, everything now revolves around academic qualifications, which I think is wrong. Whereas I think when I was growing up, it wasn't that important. Unless you wanted to be a doctor or something like that, you didn't go to university, did you? And now I think, it's almost sort of scorned upon if you don't go to university.
So sort of coming out of school, what did you get up to? What was your next moves?
Yeah, well, I was a bit of a lost soul, really. So I left school at 16. My father was an ex-military man, and he was hell-bent on forcing me into the military. He drove me to it's still there on Holdenhurst Road in Bournemouth, the Army Centre. I think it's Army, RAF and Navy now. He drove me, dropped me off there on many occasions, and I used to wait till he'd driven off, walk down the road to the pub and have a couple of pints of lager. And in hindsight, though, some part of me misses or regrets that I didn't actually do that. So he was hell-bent on doing that. I messed about really with boating and things like that. I didn't really get into going. I worked for various friends of my parents in hotels and things like that and messed around. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then I sort of got to 18, 19, and I thought, I need to sort my life out, really. I need to sort of think what I'm going to do. And sort of carried on thinking about things and reading and doing stuff. And then I decided I wanted to get into fast food. And I said to my mother and father that I wanted to get into fast food. Fast food at that stage was a new phenomenon in this country. And McDonald's had opened their first restaurant, I think, in about 1979, 1980. And off I went. And I convinced my mother. My father was completely against it. I mean, he was a bit of a snob in a funny sort of way. And he couldn't see why on earth I wanted to be involved in fast food. He said, "Oh, that's a ridiculous business to go into." And I convinced my mother to back me. And she bought, or lent me the money to buy a Golden Egg restaurant in Bournemouth Square. And
how did that feel when you completed on it?
Well, to be honest, I was chucked into the deep end because I've been having completed on it. And I think that, the first day, I think it was in the summer, and the first day, it's just absolutely mobbed. And so I sort of started with that and grafted. I was working 7 days a week, grafted and grafted and grafted at it and changed things and then changed the brand name. Ditched the Golden Egg, as Golden Egg, the franchise had collapsed. And I started this brand called Hamby, which the fascia looked very similar to Wimpy's fascia. And Wimpy had been bought by United Biscuits at the time. And they'd started competing with McDonald's with counter service restaurants. And I was doing really well there. And things were going great guns. And, I changed things and, it was busy. And this guy came in one day, and I was in the office, and one of the waitresses came down and said, "Oh, there's a man upstairs in a suit who's asked if he can meet you." So I came upstairs. I thought, this is odd, and sat down. And this bloke, he was very posh. And his name was Ian Petrie, and unfortunately he's dead now. And he said to me, "I want a cup of tea with you." So we sat there, and I said, "Well, can I help you? Who are you?" He said, "Oh, well, I run a brand called Wimpy." And I said, "Oh, yes." He said, "Yes." He said, "I'm part of the United Biscuits family. I'm part of the original family, and I'm in charge of trying to, get Wimpy going again and with counter-service restaurants to compete against McDonald's. And I'm really keen on getting Anglo-Saxon types like you as my new franchisees." And I said, "Oh, right." I said, I'm sort of rowing my own boat here, though." And he said, "Yes." He said, "Exactly." He said, "You must have received a few solicitors' letters about passing off, and because your brand name and your logo is very, very similar to ours." And I said, "I have received those, but I've just ignored them." He said, "Well, I best you don't ignore them, because we are going to take action against you." He said, "But you do have a choice." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "You become a franchisee." So I got on extremely well with Ian, and we built a great friendship. And he was a bit like a father figure, to be frank with you.
How old were you at that time?
I was 21.
21, yeah. So more of a mentor vibe.
Yeah, and he liked what I did. And very strangely, one of the guys that worked for him, this is how this all came about, lived in Bournemouth, and he used to come in the restaurant. I learned this later. He used to come in the restaurant on a weekly basis. And, the restaurant was running really well. We were quick, moving people through. And, we were doing great figures. And I built up with Wimpy Counter Service business that had, I think, 27 restaurants, including the West End of London. We had 2 restaurants in Oxford Street, restaurant in Baker Street, Tottenham Court Road. Most of the West End of London we had, and all the way down the M3 corridor, Portsmouth, Southampton, Basingstoke, Croydon. A lot of restaurants. And it was going really great, and I floated that business on the unlisted securities market in 1987. And then I sold it. Burger King then bought Wimpy, and I went to a garden party for the Prince's Business Youth Trust at Kensington Palace, and I met a guy called Alan Shepherd, who was the chairman of Grand Metropolitan. Bowled up to him and said, "Oh, I understand you bought Wimpy." And he said, "Yes, that's right." I said, "But you'll probably need to talk to me." And he said, "Why would I need to do that?" And I said, "Well, I'm the largest franchisee." "Oh, it's you, is it?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "But," and so we got chatting over a couple of glasses of champagne. The next morning I met him for breakfast, and we did a deal. And I sold in 1990, I sold the restaurant group to him. So I came out of fast food.
How long did it take you to get from 1 to 27? Because obviously it's a big jump, right?
So about 8 years, 8 or 9 years. So yeah, it was a hard work, and sold the business to him, and changed the name of the company then from Allied Restaurants to Allied Leisure PLC, and then we'd already started in tenpin bowling. So Tower Park was obviously a big thing that we created.
How did that Tower Park come about? Because obviously it's a huge project, right?
Well, originally, the Burger King that sits at Tower Park was going to be one of my restaurants.
Oh, okay.
That was going to be a Wimpy restaurant. And then I said to the developer who I worked with on the scheme that, he was going to put an equestrian centre in there, for example. I said, "That's ridiculous, equestrian centre." And so we ended up taking the nightclub, which was just an amazing nightclub called The Venue, the Mega Bowl, which is still there as a tenpin bowling centre. We ditched the fast food because I'd come out of fast food, and hence the reason why I went to Burger King.
Why didn't you, obviously when you had come out of fast food and you had an opportunity to take over the complex at Tower Park, why didn't you, restart with the fast food at that point as well as the other stuff?
Because I'd left that industry.
Had you had enough?
Do you know, it's an incredibly tough industry, fast food. I mean, it's I mean, it's a very good business. It's a great business because it's a business that does well in all economic times. If we're going through a bit of an economic problem at the moment, I guarantee you fast food restaurant sales are actually going up at the moment.
Yeah, I did actually read an article where McDonald's sales goes up in downturns. So
it's a good business, but it's a tough business. Margins are very small, and I just wanted to do something different.
What is actually tough about that business specifically, though? And I know there'd be like loads of generic things, but like, is there anything that you specific staff?
Like in all businesses,
Yeah.
But, all sorts of things. Keeping standards high was always a challenge in that business. And I used to start work some mornings at 4 a.m. I used to leave here at 4, drive to London, be in London for 6, go around the restaurants before the managers would get in there, just have a snoop round, leave notes, then go for meetings. It's to make it really hum. You've got to be right on it 24/7.
Yeah.
And
do you think, obviously, with that in mind, I know you mentioned your dad being from a military background earlier. Did he sort of support you with installing some of those habits and those like work ethic, or the work ethic in itself?
Yeah, I think that would be a positive out of my relationship with my father. For example, he'd walk in the bedroom when I was on my school holidays with a cup of water, and say it's time to get up.
Oh, it's cold.
And he'd say, "This is the last time." Then he'd tip the water on your head, and he'd make you get up in the morning. I never got a lie in. So yes, and clean shoes and wearing a suit to work, and which I always and I do, and so do all my staff. I am old fashioned in that way.
We wear Callum wears Nike and I wear Gymshark, but it's because eventually we'd love to be able to get some endorsements from them. But we were saying, obviously we had a look on the LinkedIn and everything beforehand. We were like, should we wear suits? Yeah. And we were like, no, we'll probably give it a miss.
No, it's fine. But I am a stickler for. But sometimes I do come to work if I'm going out in the boat on a Friday, I come to work in casual stuff, and it never feels like I should be at work.
I love a suit. Yeah. Genuinely, there's nothing that gets me in the mood more in the morning than putting on a suit before work.
It's bizarre. And I don't, I went to my daughter's school this morning to watch her do a poem. And they have Mufti Day. And I was thinking, is that what I pay for my daughter to have Mufti Day?
So fair.
Thing is, when you're younger, Mufti Day comes about, it's exciting.
I don't even know what Mufti Day is, bro.
Non-school uniform day.
Oh, non-school uniform day. Okay, yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, I was sat there thinking, the headmaster was trying to justify it. He said to the children something like this: when you're wearing these clothes you've been allowed to wear today, do you work hard? And they'll go, of course we do, sir. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right.
Do you think yourself upholding those high standards has attributed towards your success?
Yeah, I do. I think from a corporate level, I think that, we've propelled Fortitudo, that me and the team here, forward quite aggressively over the last few years. And I think that part of our professional approach and the way that, you've come to these offices and complimented them. A lot of people come to these offices from London and go, wow. I think it's really important that people should wear the right clothes when they're at work. There's a time and place for everything, isn't there? And, we have good fun here. We go out on corporate days out. Recently went to Goodwood Revival, took the whole office. Everyone got drunk. Everyone had a great time.
Big party.
Recently I bought whole office public sort of tickets to Coldplay, and they all had dinner there, and then they went down to the concert and they appreciated that. So as a company, we are quite generous with our staff. We expect them to work really hard, we pay well, and we party hard. But when you come to work, you come to work. And I think that ethos, a lot of people when they come here, first of all, they're a bit like, oh, do we really have to work those hours? Is it really going to be like, but actually they sort of say, well, I really like it now.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Like, there's a time and a place for everything, and go to work to work. Do you know what I mean? It's not a social event. I've joined a few companies recently, and it's different in different companies with different cultures. But I definitely am more on the same lines as like, if go to work, like dress smart, get in the right zone and you'll perform better.
You just feel good.
100%.
And when I go to London, because a lot of people, even in banks and things like that we go to now, would be dressed like you. I think that if you're wearing a suit, you immediately become and nobody else is, you become the dominant character in the room.
100%. It's a uniform.
Absolutely. And I just think, I think people respect people that wear suits. Even on hot days in the summer, I'll be wearing a suit. And some people say, why are you wearing a suit? Well, the offices are air conditioned, so what problem is it? It's not a problem for me. But I just think it's a good thing to do.
For sure. And you definitely get more respect in a suit.
Definitely.
Like, it'll be stupid things. Like, you'd be walking across the road and someone will let you go just because you're in a suit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely noticed it. So just to pull back, obviously, you get out of Wimpy and obviously you get past the fast food industry, move into Tower Park, huge development. How do you sort of structure things and how do you, I guess, sort of envision the place to look?
At the time, I always say we, by the way, because I hate saying I, because it's not just me. It was the people that worked for me or the team that we were part of, and I led. We built a nationwide business that employed over 3,000 people.
It's huge.
Allied Leisure.
Did you take the original staff or some of the original staff or the original team from when you left Wimpy?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. Obviously, all the directors and the head office staff stayed where they were, but quite a few of the area managers and the people came across into the new vision, which was moving from restaurants to leisure. So we had 3 divisions effectively. We had tenpin bowling, nightclubs, and bars, we opened sort of edge of town leisure centres like Tower Park all over the country. Manchester, Birmingham, Streatham Mega Bowl I talked about earlier, Edinburgh, Glasgow, all over the place. The business was a very successful business, and it got to, as I say, employing over 3,000 people, and I would have liked to have carried on doing what I was doing, but circumstances changed.
How did the original concept for tenpin bowling come about?
Well, it was a really interesting thing. I'd always done tenpin bowling as a child. My mum used to take me tenpin bowling occasionally.
You're any good?
To Branksome, which is still there. And tenpin bowling was a really run-down sort of pastime. It was a bit like Wimpy. Wimpy, as a lot of people remember, was table service restaurants, which were pretty worn out and pretty greasy and pretty horrible. Food was okay. And then, Ian Petrie came along and started to counter service Wimpy's in the 80s. And it became, quite a great brand again, quite a hit brand. And I looked at bowling and just thought, you know what, we could apply the same mindset to bowling as we did. Because I was, once I joined the Wimpy thing, they used my mind quite a lot on new ideas and things like that, because I became quite pally with Ian. And, he bounced a lot of stuff off me. And I just thought, I'm going to do the same in tenpin bowling as what we did in Wimpy. And, for example, in our tenpin bowling centres that we opened, we didn't allow league bowling because I saw league bowling as one of the problems, because it was the old thing. Tuesday night used to get a lot of crusty old men coming to league bowling, polishing their balls, and bowling and complaining that the lanes were over-oiled, and because in those days the lanes were wood, or maple, which is wood, and now they're all plastic. They used to complain, and they all create that horrible image of it's very male dominated, wasn't it? League bowling. So we banned league bowling, which there was absolute uproar about that.
What was that?
Oh, when we used to open tenpin bowling, because league bowling was quite a big thing in the 80s.
It's old school like darts, isn't it?
Exactly.
It used to be really big like that.
It's exactly that sort of thing, which is what I didn't want. I wanted to create family entertainment, and so I saw the whole thing as building centres that had large amusement areas. We had Laser Quest, we had big bars, we just didn't have a little bar in the corner. We had a proper bar. And, really just took the whole thing into the modern world. And, we were one of the first, to sort of take away that you didn't have to wear bowling shoes and things like that, which has now become the norm. I don't actually understand how people bowl in trainers because you can't slide on the floor. You need the proper bowling shoes. But I mean, that was one of the stigmas about putting your feet in somebody else's shoes that held people back from going bowling. So I'm a great believer in removing negatives out of a business scenario. It's the same as when we sell apartments. We allow people to sublet their apartments on Airbnb. We allow them to have animals as long as the animals don't become a nuisance. Because I'm a great believer that everything you do, you should take away the negatives.
The friction, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. And so, we built tenpin bowling centres that were different. They were bright, they were airy, they were great fun, they had music, and they looked good.
Do you remember the first one you opened?
The first bowl we opened, that's really interesting. Do you know, I think it was Tower Park.
Was it?
Yeah, I think it was Tower Park. It was either Tower Park or Bury, and it was Mega Bowl. That was the brand name, which was a great brand name, and because it was better than Super Bowl, which is what First Leisure had at the time. They were another big leisure company. And it was a massive success. And then, of course, we then started doing, big nightclubs on the same sort of sites, edge of town leisure sites. So we had the venue at Tower Park.
Why did you decide to jump from obviously the tenpin bowling into the nightclubs? Because they're in the same lane, right? But they're quite far apart from each other.
Well, it's
entertainment, family entertainment.
I think I said in another podcast that I did a good few months ago now that if I was to look back at my life, which I regularly do now, because I think once you get to a certain age, you sort of analyse the things you should have done and analyse the things you shouldn't have done.
Hindsight, right?
As much as I really had a lot of fun at being involved in nightclubs and sort of youth culture brand, probably if I relived my life, I wouldn't have been involved in nightclubs. The problem with being involved in nightclubs and bars is that you immediately get stereotyped as a gangster.
Yeah. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, I think to a degree, because I think that if you watch television, if you watch any sort of gangster movie or gangster
Goodfellas,
serial,
Sopranos,
there's always a bar and a nightclub.
Yeah, fair.
And the Robins are always in the office in the nightclub.
In their suits.
In their suits. You got it. And I do think, it's when I look back at my life, everyone used to say all sorts of things, ridiculous things.
Such as?
Well, the only way he's got all those nightclubs because he's a drugs dealer. And
whenever someone's at at a good level or at the top, people below always, take pops at them.
But when you're in business, in sensible business, I mean, don't forget this is a public limited company.
Yeah.
Allied Leisure. When you're in sensible business, I think the nightclub thing is just, in my view, if I had my time again, that would have been a no-no. Yeah, I had great fun and I had, some smashing times. But the stereotyping is a real problem. Nightclubs just seem to be a normal progression. I mean, First Leisure, who were the big leisure operators at the time, who I aspired, they were in tenpin bowling, they were in nightclubs, they were in bars, and they were in gym.
Were they your major competitor?
They were at the time.
Okay,
yeah.
So were you sort of watching, their moves and being like, actually, we could have a punt at that and we could probably do quite well at that?
I just felt that we were better than them. And they tried to buy us at one stage. They tried to buy Allied Leisure.
Did they give you an offer?
Yeah. Probably should have taken it.
What was the offer?
I can't remember now, but it was significant.
It was a good offer.
It was a significant offer. So going back to the nightclub thing, if I had my time again, I wouldn't have gone into it.
Was there any specific incidents that actually allowed that stereotype to stick with you?
I just think it's something that regularly stuck with you. I mean, I think, the problem with being involved in nightclubs, and particularly being a fairly high-profile person locally, is that, I'll give you an example. This is a really great example. Wednesday nights at the venue used to be an over 25s night. And it used to be, a very, very busy over 25s night. And everyone who's sort of my age and maybe a bit younger than me used to go to the venue. And most people around in my era now will always remember those nights. I used to dread those nights because on Thursday morning, I'd go to work. The offices were at Tower Park as well. And my PA would come up to me and said, there's a man in the reception, and me. Don't forget, there was I don't know, 30 people in the head office, maybe 40. And I said, what does he want? He said, well, his wife's lost her engagement ring and her wedding ring. And I went, well, why is that anything to do with us? Well, he wants to know, he's been up to the club and they can't find it. And he wants to know what you're going to do. And I go, well, it's not my problem. I'm not, quite clearly, his wife's taken the 2 rings off.
Yeah,
He's at the and you know,
he's convinced himself there, hasn't he? She's lost it.
Yeah. And this didn't happen once or twice. This was a regular problem, not coming to the office, but going to the club on Thursdays. The other thing is, I always remember the manager of the venue. Can't remember what his name was now. This is going back a long time ago. I'd been there on a Wednesday night, and I said, "Oh, how did last night go?" "Oh, yeah, we were really busy. Took good money." And I said, it's a bit of a strange crowd, isn't it? You get a very mixed crowd. He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "It's a real problem night." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, because what happens is that in the toilets, in the ladies' toilets, we end up with tons of carrier bags of clothes." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the women come out to get out of the house from their husband dressed quite frumpily, and their friends have brought them along some other clothes, and they get changed in the toilet."
Oh, mate. Imagine seeing your missus in a photo online.
Yeah, but in those days, there was no...
Yeah.
No cameras.
Yeah, it's crazy. I just imagine like your girlfriend goes out and then like you see a photo on, say, for example, Instagram, and she's like wearing something completely different.
Be like, and I said to him, "You're kidding me." He said, "Oh, no." He said, "There's bags and bags and bags and bags of clothes where they go home wearing the same clothes because, of course, the husbands are asleep in bed." And he said, "But it's a major problem." He said, "Because then what happens about a week later, we'll get a phone call from Mrs. So-and-so saying, 'Oh, I left a bag in the toilet. Can I come and pick it up, please?'"
No, you shouldn't have got changed.
No, it's an Oxfam now.
So obviously, you know, the transition from the leisure business to sort of 3,000 employees, I can imagine that was a big process. So how does it develop from the site at Tower Park to the next site and the multiple sites? And
we developed the Mega Bowl brand very aggressively, and it was very successful.
When you say aggressively, what do you specifically mean, though? Were there like certain marketing tactics or certain...
Just taking sites, aggressively taking sites and fitting them out. I mean, I think in 1 year, I think we opened 8 or 9 Mega Bowls in 1 year. That was aggressive, sort of strategy of building that part of the business.
How do you choose like a Mega Bowl site, though? Obviously, I haven't really got much experience or any experience when it comes to property. So, what sort of variables would you take into consideration and be like, that's a decent site, we'll take that one?
Good access by car, good numbers of car parking, which is one of the problems always with Tower Park, funny enough. Because when the cinema had a lot of good films on, the car park used to fill up and people didn't used to be able to park. In the end, we managed to persuade Tesco's to allow us to use their car park at night as well. Good access, good car parking, chimney pots all around you, no competitors close by. And that's about it, really.
What was the sort of cost implications to build up one of these sites?
About 2.8 million
per site.
But don't forget, that was 30 years ago. So it's a lot of money.
What do you reckon that transfers to now?
I don't know, because I think the equipment's not as expensive now as it used to be because of the whole way it works is different. But I would have thought substantially more. It must be substantially more.
Yeah, it must be. It's huge. Yeah. It sounds huge.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So I assume you were borrowing a lot of that money to be able to fund a lot of them things?
Yeah, so obviously we're a public company, so when we floated the company, we raised quite a lot of money. And obviously with the sale of the fast food restaurants, that money got sort of pushed back into the business and to expand that. But the business is making good money as well. But yeah, we're obviously borrowing substantial sums of money.
And you mentioned earlier that certain circumstances meant that you left Allied Leisure and that if you could go back, you would still be doing it. What were those circumstances?
Oh, well, there we go. So in about 1993, there was quite a lot of corporate issues going on with companies, and obviously we were in a bit of a recession in the early 90s. And there was one very, very famous issue, wasn't there, with a company called Polypec, a guy called Azul Nadir, who was chairman and chief executive. And there was a thing, the city, there were quite a few companies where people sat as chairman and chief executives. I was one of them. And the thing called the Cadbury's Report came out, and Cadbury's Report was a report done by one of the Cadbury's family, who was obviously a lord, I would suspect. And it basically said that it was bad business practice for a person to hold the role of chair and chief executive.
Why is that? Just too much control?
Too much control.
Yeah. Too much power.
Too much power. And as a result of that, I decided to split my roles, and I made a big tactical error because I decided that I was too young to just become chairman.
How old were you at that point?
I'd be 30, early 30s. Yeah. And I wanted to continue to build the business. And, I said I'd only split my roles if I got a non-executive chairman, which means he doesn't have executive capacity and he just came to the board meetings. And I went out with this guy quite a few times for lunch and dinner, got on really well with him. He was one of the guys that was headhunted. And his name was William Davis, and he was the ex-chairman of the English Tourist Board. So it's he ran a quango, effectively. But he was a good guy. He seemed a good guy. But as soon as he came into the company, he didn't understand, in my opinion, the difference between being an executive chairman and being a non-executive chairman. And so we clashed quite badly on expenses, on everything.
Is that off the bat, or is that after a few months of him being in the placement?
Well, it was virtually immediately. I always remember the first board meeting that he attended. He gave my PA afterwards an envelope with, expenses, and which I had to sign off, as he had to sign mine off. And I went through them, and I just sort of started laughing. I just sort of said, "I'm not signing those expenses." I said, "You're a non-executive. What do you think you're doing? Taking people out here, there, and everywhere, all over London." I was a significant sum of money, and that really was the start of the end. And I think that I brought on a couple of non-executives, and I don't think they liked. I think they sort of felt that I'd gone as far as I could go with the business. I didn't believe that, and a lot of the shareholders didn't believe that. They didn't like my style. I was very brash, very aggressive, which I was. Particularly in my early 30s.
What does being very aggressive mean? Is that in terms of just expansion? And is that what they were sort of
expansion and no nonsense from other people who worked in the business. I'd fired quite a few people, and I just didn't take any nonsense from anyone. That's how we built the business.
Yeah.
And then there was a board meeting where I had agreed with our corporate finance advisors, tentatively, subject to board approval, to merge with another leisure company. That leisure company had a lot of cash, and unlike us at that time, we didn't have a lot of cash, but we had a lot of good businesses, and they were lacking in management, whereas we had good, strong management. So it was a good
partnership.
It had been a great merger. And I presented it at my penultimate board meeting. And basically, he and the non-executive chairman and the other non-executives shot me down in flames.
What went behind your back?
Well, they obviously knew what was coming. Basically said, "We're not going to support it."
How does that feel when that's your business? Well, I know at that point
it was heartbreaking.
Yeah,
because I was the one who'd built this business.
That's what I mean. Like you at 30,
I had brought them onto my board.
You're on my team.
Exactly. And I basically said, "Well, that's it then. I'm off." And I left.
What did you do that evening?
Then about 3 bottles of vodka.
Yeah, fair play. What can you do? I'm interested. Obviously, 33 years old to have 3,000 people behind you. It's huge, right? So what does that feel like?
Never used to really bother me, to be frank. I'd never used to. In fact, it's only recently that I realised that, because I've still got a couple of the annual reports, and I was reading one the other day, it was just in my drawer, and I found it, and I just thought, wow,
It's huge.
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's huge.
We had a lot of businesses.
I feel like you had like an army behind you.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I used to see all the people, because we had a company helicopter, and I used to fly from tenpin bowling centre to tenpin bowling centre.
That's gangster.
So what sort of things were you doing socially at this point? Because I imagine running a business like that consumes a lot of your time. Were you doing anything else outside of work?
Powerboat racing.
Yeah.
That was the only thing I did. I didn't really. I got married. I can't remember what year. Well, it'd be 30 years ago now, I think I got married. So I must have been 34 when I got married. So I took my wife to Euro Disney for a long weekend. That was our honeymoon. So, which didn't go down that well. Probably the reason the marriage didn't last that long. But we're great friends now, and we've got a lovely son, and he works in the city. So it all worked out fine.
So obviously at that time you owned many nightclubs. Was it hard to not get caught up into the nightlife of owning the nightclubs?
Well, that was half the problem, is that, one of the reasons why I'd always had a really good eye for detail, and the reason why our clubs were better than everybody else's. I was, for example, you're both too young. So, the Venue nightclub at Tower Park, the doorman wore cerise pink dinner jackets with security written on them. So you could see the doorman wherever you were. And people used to comment this, but, that was, that everyone wears Dayglow rubbish plastic jackets now, don't they? Well, we were doing that 30 years ago, but it was smart. All the girls, this might sound a little bit sexist, and probably in this day and age that we live now, this probably won't go down too well, but everyone had a uniform. The girls used to wear tutus and bodies, but you couldn't be more than a size 8, because we didn't make them any bigger than size 8. So all staff were size 8 or less. A few size 10s probably managed to get the 8 over them, but you couldn't go further than that. And that's what made the club great, because it was as a club should be. It's all those little bits of detail that fix that. And so when I got married, I must be honest with you, I stopped going to the clubs, because it was I thought it's just not conducive to a great marriage. And then all of a sudden I started looking at the figures and thinking, that this isn't great. Why is this? So I said, I've got to start going back, and I'd have to go to Bedford or wherever. And we had another club called Gold Diggers in Chippenham, I think it was. And I started going up there and seeing things, and the standards had slipped, because I think one of the things about nightclubs is that I've always said that there should never be a situation when doormen are stood in the door without a manager being present quite regularly, because you see, and I see it all the time now when I go out socially. Doormen take control; it's their natural alpha male type thing. And you can't have a situation like that. The manager needs to run the door. The manager is in charge of the club, not the doorman. And it was little things like that started to slip. And so I needed to get back out and get into it. And to whip, the area manager that was in charge of nightclubs into shape and say, why is this happening? I'd go out with one of them and say, look, what's happened? Why has this been happening? And things like that. And it was all about the standards and places being clean and tidy and everything looking right. I mean, how many times you go to a nightclub these days and get stuck to the floor?
Sticky floor, yeah.
I mean, it's just revolting.
That is
sticky
revolting.
bars, no, it's worse than sticky bars. I hate that when you go to a bar or a nightclub and you put your hands on.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So obviously, you mentioned that you end up leaving the company. At that point, what do you have a game plan, or do you just decide to sort of go into property at that point?
Well, I've always been involved in property. So my first ever business deal was a property deal. So I bought a warehouse in St Michael's Road in Bournemouth, and I got outline planning permission and sold it. So property has always been a byproduct of my life, because if you think about it, with in leisure, in restaurants, it's a property business. You're taking sites, you're getting planning, and so the planning system has been a byproduct of my life from when I first started.
Because you're doing it simultaneously, right?
Exactly. And so I had a broad knowledge of property from when I very first started. So
the sites you were actually getting, at Allied Leisure, were they leasehold or were they freehold?
both.
Both.
Yeah, we bought some freeholds, did sell and lease backs. I mean, all sorts of different scenarios. Streatham, we talked about earlier, the site in London, that the Odeon Cinema, we bought that freehold, fitted it out, granted a lease to Allied Leisure, and then sold the freehold and obviously made a lot of money out of the sale of the freehold, because obviously Allied Leisure had taken a new 25-year lease. So property has always been a part of my life. And I got to when I finally left, I had a clause within my contract with Allied Leisure that I couldn't do certain things for, I can't remember, 6 or 9 months, which I observed. And then I decided I bought the Opera House, when it was the Academy in Boscombe, which was a failed nightclub effectively when we took it. And dance music was obviously the big thing at the time. Started a youth culture brand called Slinky. And we obviously had real problems in trying to get DJs to come to Boscombe, because
Boscombe still have the reputation it does now back then?
Worse.
Worse.
It was even worse then. I mean, it's a much better reputation today than it was then. And so we started the Slinky.
Why did you decide to buy the venue in Boscombe then, if you knew the reputation was?
Because I knew I could make it what it was. I had that confidence that I had the ability to do it. And also, after I'd left Allied Leisure, they'd sold the Cajun Zoo, which is now Cameos, and the venue to Rank Leisure.
Right.
They had driven those businesses into the ground. In 9 months, they'd ruined those businesses. So I knew that if I took that, I could get it.
There's an opportunity with the market.
Yeah. It was a high-capacity club, held 2,000 people. It was a great venue. Rebranded it as the Opera House. Started Slinky on a Friday night because none of the other big clubs, like God's Kitchen, Cream, et cetera, were really doing Fridays. They always did their big nights for Saturdays. So we started doing Fridays so we could get the DJs on a Friday night. And of course, it became just an absolute phenomena. That club used to do 2,500 people through the door on a Friday night. Then started sort of a much more collective night on a Saturday that played sort of vocal house and things like that. That was called Curious. That was really successful. And then we had a big student night called Hot and Horny on Thursday. So that club all of a sudden became, £7 million a year business.
Wow.
And it was very, very successful. And then the Slinky brand became bigger and bigger, and we started doing events at the Bic. We used to do 7,000-8,000 people at the Bic for Halloween and for Easter, the 2 balls. And then we started doing more and more of those sort of venues, like we did the Brighton Centre, Exeter, Cardiff. And then the Slinky brand started to do tours abroad. So we used to have a tour manager. We were selling tours all over the world, really, because we could access the DJs. And then I sold that in 2000. The dance music thing started to wane in about 2002, 2003. Sort of that more progressive sound started to try to take over. And I think that ruined it because all the kids thought it was too deep, a bit messy. And came out, sold that business and sold the brand name.
Was there ever any issues with calling it Slinkies? Because there's a kid's toy called Slinky as well.
So it's funny, there was big issues. And the brand name was owned by an American guy. And he and I, although we never met, became really okay on the phone. And occasionally he'd ring me up and he'd go, it's a little bit close to where we want to be. And he was cool. He was cool. He didn't have a problem with it. At one stage, we actually had the Slinky, the spring on some posters, and he didn't really like that. But no, he was good.
Who was the biggest DJ you signed for one of your events?
I gave Tiesto his first ever gig in the United Kingdom.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And then in terms of abroad, where else did you do the events?
New York, Australia, Melbourne, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore. I went on one of the tours down there. And that was pretty eventful.
And how long does a tour last?
Well, it lasted for as long as I wanted it to.
Fair, yeah.
But I did New Zealand, Australia, I think Indonesia and Japan in the space of, I don't know, 3 weeks, something like that.
So it's a good run at it.
Yeah, and we used to do in Ibiza, I think it was Esparadis on a Thursday.
I haven't been to a Paradise in Ibiza. It might have changed
Long
by
time
now.
ago.
Yeah, for sure. So then obviously, you sell that business. What do you decide to move into? I presume at this point you're also doing the property on the side.
And I was building at that stage, so but not that much, and I was sold that, carried on doing what I was doing, opened up some bars in Bournemouth. So you might remember Bliss,
Yeah.
Togo, Slam, and Crank in Hinton Road, and then on Poole Quay we had a couple of bars, and that was run by a bloke who I'm still friends with. He was my sort of operations director, Jim Beedham, and I carried on just doing the property. And then 2008 came, and that was the end of everything.
Okay.
Because it was the market crash, and I got called out.
When you say you got caught out, can you talk us through that?
Well, I mean, I watched the film, funny enough, 2 nights ago, called The Big Short. It's worth watching because it's all about what happened. And of course, when you watch that film, you think, oh my God, it was really bad. I mean, basically, people got very wobbly, didn't they? When you've got banks crashing all over the world. I mean, you had, NatWest Bank nearly went bust in this country. And I was fairly highly leveraged at the time. And one of the banks I was sort of heavily indebted to was owned by the National Australian Bank, NAB. And NAB, in their infinite wisdom, said that, anyone who's in a distressed position needs to be put into administration. I got put into administration, which was, to me, was completely and utterly unnecessary.
How did that conversation come about? Did you have to sort of go out to Australia to have that conversation with them, or?
No, we were so through 2008, from about March onwards in 2008, we were sort of in a distressed position, effectively.
Did you know at that point the severity of what was to come?
No. The people I was working with in the bank were really happy with what we were doing.
Okay.
And we were going to work it through. In fact, they actually said, look, there's no point in us doing anything else. You're not drawing any money out of the business. You're still making sales. You're still going forward. But then I think NAB got panicked when, I think it was Bear Stearns went bust, and when what was it? There was a bank here went bust. I can't remember what they're called now. And I think they just got panicked, and that was the end of it. And I got told that we were going to be put into administration.
So after being told that they were going to work through it, they just sort of came out the blue and was just like, actually, sorry, we're going to have to put you into administration.
Well, the actual words were, it's completely out of our hands and we don't agree with it.
Wow.
But this order's come from on high, and so be it.
How did it feel in that moment? Because obviously it's huge, right?
Well, I don't think it's words to describe it.
Yeah.
To be frank, I mean, it was obviously, I was thinking of retiring, semi-retiring. My aim was to go to the States, and effectively Jim was going to take the bar business off me and pay me so much a year, and then I'd still do a bit of property and support the guys in the office. And I wanted to go out there and just do what I wanted what I'd always thought I'd like to do,
Which is,
I don't know, just bum about a bit,
a bit of boating.
bit of boating, just have a bit of fun.
Yeah.
And course, that came as all a bit of a shock because all of my dreams were shattered in one go. And then, of course, the bar business was cross-guaranteed with the bank as collateral. And so that then went into administration. So I was left with nothing. And unfortunately, I had a lot of personal guarantees to the bank and to various other institutions. And I ended up having to go personally bankrupt.
So, at that point where you've liquidated, what was the knock-on effect for all of the sort of subcontractors that would have been working either for you or for somebody that you had employed?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I'm really pleased you've asked that, because there weren't any subcontractors. Because the way that we predominantly, and even today we predominantly do this, is that we have a thing called a JCT contract. So you as a main contractor will come to me and say, I'll build that block of flats for you for X million. I'll sign a JCT contract and I pay you. And clearly, which is what always happens, I keep you up to date, but I don't know who you're paying. And clearly, I mean, it was quite clear that I would have thought for about 3 months that the writing was on the wall. Clearly, the main contractor was not paying his subbies. But then when it all happens, you're the one that gets blamed because the subbies think you haven't paid the main contractor, which we had. But that's life, isn't it?
So as the one that got blamed, what was it like working through sort of like the next few months and almost year or two where everybody thought it was your fault, not the direct person you had a JCT with?
I just think you just got to get on with it, which I did. But I ended up with nothing. I was living for a while. I moved out of my house because I didn't think that I would be able to stay there. So I didn't want to end up being homeless effectively. So I managed to rent a flat, which I lived in for a short while. And then, of course, the interest rates came right down, and my mortgage on my house was linked to base rate. So the mortgage on the house was less than $1,000 a month. So I moved back into the house, much to the trustees in bankruptcy's opinion that I shouldn't have. But I said, well, it's only the same rent as what my flat is. So why can't I move back in there? Started paying the mortgage again. And then just slowly got out of the tangle that I was in. And that was it, really.
So you mentioned the tangle that you were in. What were the next moves out of that tangle?
Well, clearly, everyone believed that I had money still. I mean, didn't matter what I said or what I did. I think the consensus opinion was that I had millions of pounds stashed here and there and everywhere. And I didn't, because I'd used every penny to try and keep the business going. I fought as hard as I possibly could. Just every day was a battle to keep things moving, to try and get through the mess. And I came out of my bankruptcy in 2009. Started in doing bits and pieces again. Only trading my own name at that stage. And I had a bit of a lucky break and sort of got going again. Nothing hectic, but, sort of going. And then in 2012, November 2012, I got arrested. My ex-business partner got arrested. My ex-wife got arrested, even though we'd been divorced for at that time, I would have thought about 22 years. And various other people. My sister got arrested, my brother-in-law got arrested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we all got taken to a police station, and we were there all day long. And I just really couldn't understand what was going on. I thought it was really weird because I was thinking, well, what have I done?
Did you have any idea beforehand that was going to happen?
No.
Nothing?
No, nothing.
So just out of the blue?
Absolutely out of the blue. The only thing that I was slightly suspicious of was Jim, who also got arrested, my ex-ops director, who had a business in Bournemouth, had got a phone call from the police saying, which I had some involvement in, from the police, was because I was in America quite a lot of the time. Is Richard here? When's Richard back from America? Instead of passing in conversation, a licensing officer. And Jim said that to me. And he said, oh no, he's back from America. He's here now. So they knew that I was going back
in America,
Yeah.
right?
Anyway, so we all got arrested, and by the time I was in the cell for a whole day, which wasn't very pleasant. And 7:30 that evening, got interviewed, and I just thought, this is ridiculous, the whole thing. But clearly, one of the reasons why this situation can arise is because of public interest. And there was a lot of, whenever the Echo printed something, which was always a negative story in this era of my life, because, I'd gone bust and blah, blah, blah. Everyone was always writing and saying, oh, he's got millions, he's got this, he's got that, he's got this. So I think the authorities thought, well, let's check him out, see whether he has lied. Anyway, they started off on their journey.
So what was the initial interview like when, you got out of the cell after 24 hours? Did they just tell you what they, thought had happened?
They interviewed me and questioned me on various things that they'd seen and learnt through their previous investigations. I'd been under surveillance, obviously, for a long period of time. It was called Operation Fresco.
Right.
I mean, it was that, it was a proper thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, the long and the short of it is that the policeman who was leading the sort of Operation Fresco was a particularly, obnoxious individual, I would call him. And he quite clearly didn't like me. And I sort of answered all the questions on the first interview. He then went round to all the solicitors that I'd dealt with, obviously in the area, and confiscated all my books and records and files and property things. And he made a disparaging comment to one of the solicitors, which I got told about, and we then formally complained about. And I then made no comment in any further interview.
What was the comment?
That you should pick your clients more. You should pick your clients more carefully, and not act for certain individuals. Well, that, in consideration that I'm innocent until proven guilty, that's not a particularly good thing to say. And so it went on from there. And then
So what were they actually trying to do you for?
everything they possibly could.
So just a target on your back?
Yeah, exactly. So they thought at the beginning, I'm pretty sure this is my view, that I did have money hidden. They even had federal agents in America going to various boatyards where they'd seen the stuff they collected up. They knew I'd raced in America and I'd kept my boat in certain yards. Federal agents went to yards in America because people phoned me up and said, Richard, what the hell's going on? I've got a federal agent here. And I'm going, well, I haven't got a clue. And he said, well, I haven't had a boat in your boatyard for God knows how many years. He said, I know. He said, but it's not a great thing having a federal agent come and visit us.
What does that do to you in the moment? Like federal agent in America looking, for a boat.
It's worse than that. They put a spot on my name. I went to America. Okay. When I got to America, that was it. I was double interviewed, triple interviewed. I was nearly put back on the plane to come back. Oh, it was serious stuff. And anyway, so this is my personal view, is that they couldn't or never found anything that was material. And they charged, this went on for 3 years. I mean, 2 years, I think it was actually. 2 years we were on police bail, and every time we would get to the day of charging us, it got put back and it got put back.
What does that do to you in the moment?
It's horrendous. I mean, I don't want to think about it, because last time I did the podcast on this, I got quite emotive about it, because I am emotive about it. And, it was just horrendous. You've no idea emotionally what it does to you. I mean, it always makes me laugh when you hear people talking about people who've got mental stress and issues. Well, this was enough to drive you to commit suicide.
100%, yeah.
I mean, that's
a real serious situation.
Yeah, and that's why I start laughing when I'm in the shower in the morning and I hear that somebody's got, a sort of problem with going to work because their cornflakes have run out.
It is like that now. It's ridiculous.
I mean, please?
Yeah. There's a lot more serious things out there.
Yeah, I mean, this mental health thing, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, so, I had some really dark days. And
What kept you grounded though? Because like
I had a newborn son. That kept me grounded. Yeah. Anyway, it was tough. And anyway, we got to court in the end. So what happened then was the trial was broken up into two parts: pre-bankruptcy and post-bankruptcy.
And are you working throughout the 2 years trying to keep things stable?
Trying to make a living. It was difficult because everything I tried to do, they try and stop me. Anyway, so got to the first trial, which is at Winchester Crown Court. And luckily, my family had put money into getting me a proper barrister. And I had a QC called Miranda Moore. And she was excellent. And she smelt a rat that something wasn't right because one of the banks had refused to give evidence against me at the last minute. And she said to me, I'll always remember, she said to me, that's really weird, you know. They've backed out wanting to give evidence against you at the last minute. Something's not right. Anyway, so we went to trial and she'd uncovered why they wouldn't give evidence because in two interviews, two members of staff at the bank had been coerced to writing their interviews in certain ways or their statements in certain ways by this police officer. And clearly the head of I don't know what would he be, compliance, I suppose, the head of compliance at the bank had said to his bosses, there's no way we're giving evidence. We could be in really serious trouble here because some of the statements that have been given aren't actually factually correct. Anyway, so she found this out. And
when did she find that out?
About a week before the trial.
Oh.
They backed out. All of a sudden they disappeared as the police weren't using them, and she thought that's really weird because they were, obviously big player in the whole thing. Anyway, so trial never started. The jury was sworn in. Jury then disappeared out.
And what are they actually specifically, trying to pin on you at that point?
So, I mean, there's, as I said, there was two trials. So
yes.
let's say there's 20 charges on each trial.
20?
Yeah, there were all sorts of things. I mean, like letting a property without a Help to Buy mortgage.
Doesn't everyone do that?
Yes. Like, how many women in this country meet a guy, get married to him, and let their property out? I mean, it happens every day. I mean, all sorts of things like that. Some things were a lot more serious than that. Like, there were some financial irregularities where I'd moved money around before for when we were trying to save the companies that they had twisted into other things. There were all sorts of, things that happen in business every day.
Were they sort of trying to say that you were actually taking that money personally yourself?
This is what they tried. When they couldn't find anything, they tried to elaborate that I'd removed this or stolen this money.
The irony is you've been putting it into the business to try and save it.
Exactly. Anyway, so I mean, we were paying drink suppliers with cash because we couldn't get any credit. The bars, because the rumours were flying around. All our credit lines got stopped, and it was just mayhem. Anyway, so first trial came. Judge stood up and Miranda stood up and said, I've got, I can't remember how she put it, but she said, I've got a query with regards to some of the evidence. There seems to be something missing. And the judge said, well, what in particular? And she recited what page it was and blah, blah, blah. And he said, could you both, the lead counsels, meet me in my chambers? So they went to their chambers, did their thing, came out, and the judge said, well, I've heard and listened to what the defence QC has said, and whereas I'm not happy with it, I'm going to proceed with the trial. We may as well stop for lunch now, and we'll come back at 2:15. So we were let out. We could go and do what we want. We didn't have to go to a cell or anything. Anyway, when I came back at about 2:45, Miranda was sat there. She said, I'm glad you're back early. I said, what's happened? She said, we found something else, and I think this will be the end of the trial. And it was a piece of unused evidence. So any evidence that the prosecution don't use, because it becomes unused evidence, which we then can have access to. But there was a piece of unused evidence that had been destroyed. And it was a piece that would have helped us to knock out, some of the charges. Anyway, so we went back in, all sat down, jury are brought in, and it was as if everything was going to start. Anyway, so the judge came in, and judge said whatever he said. The prosecution said what they said. Miranda said, I'd like to stand up, make a comment to you, sir. He said, well, what now? She said, well, I'd like to point out that I've uncovered a further piece of evidence that has been tampered with in this trial. And he goes, that's a really severe word to be using. She said, well, it's fact, and I can prove it. So the lead counsel, please come to my chamber, came out. He said to the jury, you're all dismissed. And for the time being, and he says, in light of what I've seen today, this trial can't continue. It's annulled. And then he said, well, we've got another trial for the other information. I wish another police force and another set of people from business industry and skills to re-interview all of the witnesses, and we will come back in 4 weeks. So that was the worst 4 weeks of my life, I'm going to be honest with you.
Agonising.
Oh, it was just horrendous. Anyway, came back 4 weeks later, sat down, thinking, here we go again. The jury weren't even brought in at this stage. The judge came in and sat down, and he said to the prosecution QC, he said, could you read out what charges you'll be bringing against Mr. Carr and his co-defendants? And the QC stood up from the other side and said, the Crown has no evidence to charge Mr. Carr with. So the judge says, what do you mean? I said, well, we've retaken all the witness statements, and they are substantially different to what we originally had. So therefore, we don't have a trial. So it was really interesting to watch then what happened, because I honestly think that the judge was just like, I can't believe that this has happened.
It's unbelievable.
In this country. I cannot believe this happened. Anyway, that was the end.
How did you feel in that moment?
Well, that's the weirdest thing. That is a really, really weird moment in my life. Do you know what? I wasn't ecstatic.
Probably relieved, right?
No. I think it's the only time in my life where I've actually suffered from shock, because it was almost like it was a bad dream. And it was like, am I imagining this?
Yeah.
Is this really real? And it took me quite a long time to get over it.
How long?
I don't know, quite a long time, I think. Probably, I couldn't go out and celebrate it, if you see what I mean. It wasn't something that I went straight to the pub and, of course I did have a few drinks, but underneath, I was really, really confused.
Had to absorb it almost.
Well, it should never happen. You wouldn't think it could happen in this country. In fact, Miranda said to me, she's I don't know how old she'd be, Miranda, but she's, I think, in her 50s, early 50s. She said, do you know, I've read books, heard stories, but I never thought that I would be in a trial where this was possible in this country. That's what she said.
What does that do to you as a man at that point?
Well, I'm a pretty resilient sort of person because of where I was brought up. And I was just thankful and sort of like, right, I've got to get on with my life. And that's why I decided not to take any action against the police. The trial cost it cost my family, well, and me, because I had to pay money back, £500,000.
Wow.
Which you don't get a penny back from state because it's a criminal trial. Yeah.
That's insane, even though you know, the
And
evidence.
I was advised, you know, I nearly took a private prosecution against the policeman personally, and I decided against it. I decided that there's no point. And I went to see the crime commissioner, Dorset crime commissioner. It's not the current one, it's the one that was there last time. And I said, he asked me, why have you come to see me? And I've said, well, I've come to tell you that I'm not going to take any action. And I just want you to know that bygones are bygones and I'm moving forward in my life. And that was that.
So did you just want that gone?
Chapter done.
I'm a great believer in not crying over spilt milk, and great believer that something like that, if you take something like that to heart, it would consume the rest of your life. Because you would never, I mean, I know a guy who has spent probably the last 28 years of his life trying to fight something that happened to him, and he's got nowhere. And I think he's dead now, funny enough. And I always thought of him, and every time you saw him, in fact, it was a real problem if you bumped into him, because all he'd do is go on and on and on and on and on about this injustice that he'd had. And every time you saw him, it's like a stuck record. And I thought, I'm not going to become like that.
Did his happen before yours as well?
Yeah, a long time before mine.
Yeah, so it was almost like an eye opener to like that could happen.
His was more of his imagination than it wasn't a real circumstance like this. But I mean, you know, it is what it is, and you know, my life's been a rich tapestry of you know, achievements and downtime. But that was probably the icing on the cake.
Yeah, it's got to be the lowest point from what you've said today.
Yeah, absolutely. That 15 years of my life, I suppose I call it, is like the missing 15 years. You know, like you know, going bust in 2008 and actually coming out of that on the other side were lost years, really. Yeah.
Going to zero from obviously having the business at 3,000 people before that must have been a lot to like take in.
Yeah, but that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I rate it massively, but I'm just like, that is, you know, a huge loss at that point. It's a big
I think that and this is what annoys me about all these sort of mental health people going on about cornflakes have run out and things like that, and rubbish like that. And I can't come to work today because I've got a headache. You know, I don't even understand that mindset. I mean, then my mindset and what I was always taught by my parents was, you know, whatever you do, don't give up. You've got to keep going. And that's what I did. Hence the reason I'm here today.
It's the only way to be. So obviously after the trial, you get, you know, cleared of everything. What do you decide to do in terms of the business, and how do you decide to sort of build it? Do you hit it with that same aggression, or do you take some time out, or?
No, I was
Back at work on the Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair play.
I was. I was back at work on them. And, you know, just I had a small office in a friend's building and just started doing, you know, looking for sites, and started getting planning permission on sites I'd identify, making £20,000-30,000, and built it up. And then I got a big planning permission through on Depot Road, which went quite well. And then sort of just slowly gathered some cash and got moving again.
How difficult was it to regain the business relationships after what we could call the bad press, the injustice? Going forward, how was it working with the people again?
It's taken a long time, I think, with certain people. But you know what? I think once we were seen, you're seen to be getting going again and pulling off, you know, a deal here and a deal there. People hear about it. I think a lot of people sort of quietly thought, fair play.
Yeah.
You're always going to get certain people who are just green-eyed monsters. I mean, they exist. You know, that's just society. But I think quietly a lot of people thought, well, yeah, fair play to him. He's you know, sorted himself out and getting on with it. And it's the way I would say to somebody, you know, whenever I see somebody doing well, I always say fair play to you, or well done. And I just think that's one of the problems, isn't it, with our society today, is not a lot of the problems that are out there politically and in society, are they not driven by envy?
Yeah, I think that's a massive issue just with the UK mindset and culture. They almost don't want people to succeed.
I mean, I've got a Bentley Mulsanne Speed. I don't drive it for work, and I use it at weekends. And, it's quite horrendous to see people's faces. I mean, it's almost like you could make a program out of going out in your Bentley Mulsanne Speed with a video recorder, just taking pictures of people's faces. And it's really quite weird, you're a bit at traffic lights and someone will go by that you don't really know, but you sort of know, and they'll pretend not to see you. It's really odd. And it's not everyone. Some people put their thumbs up and things like that and think, wow. Other people, it's very, very strange. And but I think we've got a major issue in our society, in this country, with envy.
Definitely.
Because everyone, I suppose it's all about the entitlement thing again, isn't it? It's that entitlement actually has got is a poison, isn't it? And I suppose that, whilst you've got people who are influencing on social media and earning God knows how much money, you hear all these stories, and it's quite easy money. I think that is bred into the youth today. And I just think that working hard is almost like, oh, I'm not going to work hard, I'm going to do this. There must be an easy way. But in my opinion, there is no easy way to make money. I think that hard work is the only real remedy to bettering yourself.
It's rule number one, isn't it? Do you think anyone can make it to the top?
Yeah, I think so. I think, what do you call the top?
Well, I'd say 3,000 people in a company is quite near the top, or if not at the top.
Yeah, I do. I think, but again, that was only created through hard work. And going back to those days, I mean, I couldn't do it now. I used to leave 4 in the morning, as I said, and work all day and not get back till 9 o'clock at night. And I think, I've always, I was brought up that you work hard and you've got to keep going. And this is what makes me laugh a bit about the situation we've currently got with, various people wanting to go on strike. I mean, you've got this issue with the rail workers, and they're going on about, wages aren't keeping up with inflation. Well, what about all the self-employed people in this country? There are millions and millions and millions and millions of self-employed people out there that don't automatically get a pay rise just because inflation's gone up. I don't automatically get a pay rise just because inflation's gone up. I have to cut my cloth to fit with how the business is going. And I think this is one of the great problems in this country, particularly with news readers and news outlets, is that they go on about, the nurses should have 10% plus 5%. Well, I don't know if I agree with that. That's 15%. But what about all the self-employed people? What about all the shopkeepers around here who are struggling? They don't get that. And I think that's another failure of recognition of people who are self-employed.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, 1,000%. You touched on the press there. Obviously, what are your thoughts of, the local press or the press in the South? Yeah.
Well, I don't know about the local press. I mean, I have quite a good relationship these days with the local press. And I think that's partly goes back to the point I was making earlier, is that, I've crawled up the wall and sort of got myself a little bit further up the ladder again.
Everyone loves a comeback story, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think national press, well, I mean, it's just too left-wing, isn't it? I mean, there is the right-wing outlets like News 24 and Talk TV, I mean, they're okay, but they're not really seen as mainstream. I mean, even Sky News now, in my opinion, is as left-wing as the BBC. I mean, when the budget was on, I do think it was a stupid mistake what Kwasi Kwarteng did with that 45p tax rate. But if you actually strip that out and look at everything else that has been done, what Liz Truss and him have done, actually the working man got 1.25% pay increase because of the national insurance turnaround, plus a 1%. So everyone got a 2.25% pay increase effectively because the tax rate had gone down. And I just think it's a shame that didn't catch on, and no one wanted to elaborate that. Everyone just stuck on that at 45p. But I think it was a bad mistake. I'm very politically minded. I am right wing, which I expect you'd guess. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in politics over the next few years. I think that it would be a massive mistake to kick Liz Truss out. I really do think people should. Her own party needs to get behind her and let her push forward. I think what she's saying, I think you're right, personally.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate all of that for sure. So just to pull back, obviously, with the latest business, how does that develop out? Obviously, after the case, etc. How do you sort of build the business from there?
What, this business?
Yeah, this business.
Where does this business go from now?
Yeah, well, no, from after the case and obviously developing it.
Well, I mean, started off with a small office underneath the Haven Hotel doing planning permissions and bits and pieces, as I say. Then got planning permission for Saltness Marina, which I dealt with, a big planning permission. Got planning permission for various other things. Then I moved to an office in Lilliput, which I had on the corner of where I live, funny enough, just around the corner from my house. And I had an office there, which there was 3 or 4 of us in there, which people are still out there. And then we moved here. So we moved here on the year of the COVID lockdown. And we've been here for over 2 years now. And probably won't move from here. I mean, we've got enough space here for what we want to do. And the business is sort of becoming more of a regional development business now. We've got sites as far east as Hove. We don't really go west of here. We've also got a lot going on around here. Sites in Chichester, haven't. So, it's this is sort of our patch, really.
Would you say you've implemented the same aggressive strategy that you did with the complexes to your development strategy?
Yeah, in one way. I mean, when the COVID lockdown came in March 2020, wasn't it? I said to everyone in the office that we were going to take a different approach to every other developer, and that we would take as many sites as we possibly could on options, because I just think it gave us opportunity. A lot of developers shut their doors and thought, whoa, where are we going with this? So we probably got certain sites that we wouldn't have been able to get normally. And I think that's pushed the business from, let's just say, being a parochial business into being a regional player, which I think it is now. And where does it go from here? I think we just carry on doing more of the same.
So obviously there's plenty of sites around, plenty of Fortitudo sites. How are they actually funded? So
typically, so we have a lot of high net worth investors in the business. Typically they would put in 35%, and the balance of that would be lent on senior debt.
Makes sense. Have you got one development that sticks in mind as your favourite?
Not really. I love all of them.
Yeah. Fair.
I mean, recently, I spent a lot of time on one development recently that's just been finished. So Martello Park, we built 4 luxury apartments there. I put a lot of my personal effort into that because that was an end of the market that we hadn't been in. Sort of flats at over £2 million. They were beautiful apartments, and they all sold off plan, and they're all finished now. So that's pretty exciting. We obviously got this scheme. Well, actually, that's a scheme there for Bournemouth Town Centre, Furvale Road. Hopefully, that'll come to planning in November. That's the largest scheme, obviously, I've ever done.
I saw an article on that. It looks enormous.
750,000 square feet. So it's quite stunning.
How many flats / apartments are going to be out there?
500. There'd be 80,000 square feet of leisure in the basement, 40,000 square foot nightclub, 500 capacity car park, 110 bedroom hotel, 500 residential apartments, and a sky bar.
Wow.
It's big.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
But it will completely invigorate, I think, the town centre, of Bournemouth, which is really necessary.
Yeah.
Something's got to happen.
For sure. No, I completely agree. So I guess that brings us sort of full circle and up to date with where we're at today. In terms of the next chapter with the business, we've obviously touched on it with the next development. What's next on the cards for yourself?
Carry on doing more of the same. I'll never retire.
Fancy that American trip?
No, it's really interesting. That's a really interesting topic because I used to go to America an awful lot and I raced there. And I still do love America. And I don't know what it is, but that period when I went through all that hardship, I go back to America now and I'm not so in love with it. It's really quite strange.
Like a bit of trauma almost.
I just thought maybe I've seen through the veneer of it all. I love the boating there. I love the weather. I just maybe just got fed up with the sort of fakeness of some of it. It is a bit fake.
Yeah, 100%, and a bit exaggerated, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I've gone off that idea. I quite like it here, and I've got 3 young children. So I've got a 10-year-old, 7-year-old, and 2-year-old, and obviously a 28-year-old who works in London. And so I've got to see them through and bring them up. And so that's really my focus.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess we'll wrap it up there unless you've got anything else to say, Cal.
No, I do actually just want to ask as well, with Fortitudo itself, is there any plans for you to float it? Because obviously you floated a few before.
No, I've looked at it, and no, there's not. I funny enough, I looked at it recently and I went to see a corporate finance advisor in London, and I don't think there's any point in doing it because capital markets now, there's so many different. If you went back to the Allied days, the capital markets were very much more narrow. Floating a business was the way to get access to large sums of capital. There is so much more money now with family offices and high net worth individuals. I don't see any point in floating the business. Access to capital is not an issue for us, and becomes less and less of a hurdle as time goes on, and we do more and more things and more and more successful schemes, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I guess that wraps it up. Just want to say thanks for your time. Thanks for being brutally honest as well today.
Yeah, super appreciative. Yeah, it was really, really good. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.